The term climate emergency is used a lot these days, but what does it actually mean? We'll explain.
And how can a single-seat motorsport become carbon neutral? I'll be breaking it down.
And we'll be sharing details of how to win a VIP Formula E experience courtesy of Envision Virgin Racing.
All this and more.
Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Ella.
And this is the very first episode of the Race Against Climate Change.
Throughout this series, we're going to be breaking down the different aspects of the climate emergency, looking at possible solutions, and keeping you up to date with the latest electric vehicle technology and Formula E news.
Each episode, I'll be getting to grips with a different aspect of the very hot topic that is climate change. And since this is the very first episode, I thought, why not start at the very beginning? What exactly is the climate emergency? Global warming, climate change, the climate crisis, they're terms that we hear a lot, and they're basically all describing similar things. Changes in the global climate. Changes caused by humans. All around the world, we're releasing lots of greenhouse gases from activities like driving our petrol cars, farming cattle, and even buying lots of new clothes. These gases are released into the atmosphere, where they build up and cause something called the greenhouse effect. This is where these greenhouse gases cause more of the sun's energy to be trapped inside the Earth's atmosphere instead of being radiated back out into space, causing the Earth to heat up. A bit like a greenhouse if you think about it, but perhaps not like this one. This greenhouse effect, it's worth pointing out, is not the same as the weather. Climate change and global warming are not about getting lots of those nice sunny days to go sunbathing. We tend to call that the weather, and the weather can vary over a short period of time. Climate change does affect the weather, but the actual change in climate occurs over a period of many years, and the consequences of it are much more dire than just the risk of getting sunburnt. The climate crisis endangers all life on Earth as we know it. The main gases that cause the greenhouse effect, and therefore global warming, are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and some small quantities of other gases. Carbon dioxide is talked about a lot, and that's because it makes up a whopping 64% of global man-made emissions. We release it through a lot of industrial processes, primarily when we burn fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are part of a natural process called the carbon cycle, which keeps the natural balance of carbon in the air, oceans, and ecosystems on Earth. And in order to understand climate change, we need to understand how important it is that we keep this cycle balanced. Let's take a closer look. The carbon cycle occurs naturally on Earth, and it consists of sources, parts of the cycle that add carbon to the atmosphere, and sinks, parts of it that remove carbon. There are a few key stages to the cycle. Firstly, animals, such as us humans, and plants respire to release carbon dioxide, which enters the atmosphere. This is then absorbed by plants during photosynthesis to produce oxygen, which is why plants like trees are often called the lungs of the planet. When plants and animals die, they are then broken down by decomposers, who also release carbon dioxide as they break down dead matter. The remaining dead matter, which contains carbon, is trapped underground, and over millions of years, and due to pressure and heat, the remains form substances such as oil, gas, and coal. These are the fossil fuels I was talking about earlier, and they trap lots of carbon underground, keeping it out of the atmosphere. Volcanoes are also a part of the carbon cycle. They release carbon dioxide when they erupt. Currently, the amount of carbon dioxide volcanoes release has a minimal effect on the global climate, but there have been times in the Earth's history where volcanoes have significantly impacted the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and have caused changes in the climate. Finally, the oceans also absorb and release carbon dioxide. Normally, when us humans aren't interfering, this cycle is balanced, with the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere naturally regulated. However, the reason why carbon dioxide is quickly accumulating in the atmosphere is because we're adding a few extra sources of carbon to this delicate system. For a start, we're digging up the fossil fuels that trap so much carbon, and we're burning them to produce electricity and to heat our homes. Many power stations around the world burn fossil fuels like coal to produce heat, which is then used to boil water and turn it into steam. The steam then makes a turbine inside the station spin, which turns a generator, producing the electricity we use. This process generates a lot of energy, but it also releases lots of the carbon previously trapped inside these fuels for millions of years. And since many of our houses are powered by stations like this one, we kind of all have a part to play, probably unknowingly, in the release of carbon from these fuels into the atmosphere. Petrol and diesel, which are often used to fuel transport, are also fossil fuels. This means we're releasing a lot of carbon dioxide when we collectively drive our cars or fly in planes. The industries that produce these fuels, along with many other important products for our everyday lives, also produce a lot of emissions, with just 20 companies producing a third of global carbon emissions. You've then got agriculture. The rearing of livestock, in particular cows, is responsible for around 14.5% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Due to the amount of cattle we need to rear and the crops we need to grow to feed them, we're also cutting down lots of the trees that absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which means less carbon dioxide is absorbed during photosynthesis. Plus, when we burn the wood we've cut down, we're releasing the carbon the trees have stored as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And to top it all off, the rising global temperature due to the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere causes the oceans to heat up, meaning they also start to release some of the carbon dioxide they've absorbed. Globally, we're adding 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere each year and tipping the carbon cycle further off balance. And if we're not careful, we may just tip the scales permanently off balance and put ourselves in a possibly irreversible situation of global warming. This is the climate emergency.
So it was due to be the start of the Formula E racing season, but we've already had some pretty interesting news. And that is that the first race, which was due to be in Santiago, has now been postponed. So the first race is now set to be in Diriyah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a bit later this month, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all due to COVID restrictions and lockdowns. It just makes a bit more sense.
Like everything this year and last year.
True, yeah.
Yeah, there's actually also been some quite exciting news to look forward to as well when it comes to climate change, because, well, for a start, President Joe Biden, who's just been sworn in as president in the US, has rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement to try and keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. So that's really great news because President Trump left that. And also Envision Virgin Racing have partnered with COP26, which is due to take place here in the UK later this year, which is super exciting.
And on the note of doing good for the planet, that's exactly what makes Formula E stand out compared to other motorsports. Formula E, as it kind of says in the name, is fully electric, with teams like Envision Virgin Racing going carbon neutral. And I wanted to see what challenges this big commitment poses to teams like Envision Virgin Racing, and what tech they're using to race fully electric. This is what I'll be exploring in Fast and Curious. In Fast and Curious, I'm going to be exploring how a super competitive single-seater racing championship like Formula E that has high-performance cars that can reach over 170 miles per hour and accelerate from 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds can become all electric and emission-free. The idea that a racing series that takes place in several continents around the world,
and we go green in Berlin,
can become carbon neutral or net zero really made me curious, and I wanted to find out more about the cars themselves, the technology, and how the innovations made within the sport make it into the cars that we see on the road today and will in the future. I'll be sharing everything I find out here in Fast and Curious. So let's start with the topic of sustainability and how FE managed to achieve a 3-star accreditation for sustainability from the UN. Meanwhile, its F1 counterpart is left spluttering towards the target of 2030, by which to have achieved a carbon net zero status. Well, it all came down to a pretty simple approach, really. First, to develop a robust method for how to accurately measure the size of the carbon footprint the sport is responsible for. Second, to continually strive to reduce this footprint every season. And lastly, to offset any remaining carbon footprint through a certified carbon capture program. The success of this approach has led to the ABB Formula E Championship becoming the first sport to have a net zero carbon footprint since inception. Thanks to this three-step approach, they've managed to reduce their carbon footprint by looking at all areas of the sport, finding efficiencies and the best environmental practices, and offsetting all of their carbon emissions throughout the 6 seasons of all-electric racing. So, well done Formula E and everyone involved. And to accomplish such an amazing achievement, it has to involve everyone, including the racing teams. And teams like Envision Virgin Racing, one of the founding teams of Formula E, have played a significant role in this. And I was curious and wanted to find out more. So what's a better way than to speak to the Operations Director, Jennifer Babington. Hi Jennifer.
Hello, hi Ella, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
All is good, we're all surviving.
Oh, good. So I just wanted to get a bit of an idea of, so when you first heard that the sport Formula E was going to try and have net zero carbon emissions, what were your thoughts about it initially?
So initial skepticism around whether it was possible, but now I've been doing it for the last 2 years, kind of, fully on board and understand the challenges that we're facing and respect the series for pulling it together.
And obviously the teams like Envision Virgin, like yourselves, do play a big role in that transition to a net zero carbon emissions sport of Formula E. So what were the first steps that you needed to take?
The first thing that we always have to do, whether that's as individuals at home or as part of businesses, is understand the impact that you're having on the planet. So the first steps that we did were to engage with the Carbon Trust, to work as a team to understand what we were doing and really measure and understand what we're doing, because if you don't know the impact you're having, you can't reduce it. And then the second point, which kind of is equally as important, is understand why you exist. So for me, it was a complete, and for the team, it was a complete no-brainer, wasted opportunity driving round and round and round in circles without having a point. We don't have cars to sell, we don't have a product to sell. So it was a really easy thing for us to say that as a team, the whole purpose we had was around energizing the race against climate change, trying to inspire people to transition to EVs, to adopt, greener and cleaner forms of transport to solve that massive problem that's out there, and using our media platform in order to achieve that.
So what would you say the most difficult part of reducing your footprint was?
Well, I'm not going to put anyone in this, but one of the things that you can do to reduce your footprint is obviously looking at travel. So we travel to 15 races all around the world. There's sim trips as well as part of that. There's sponsorship trips as part of it. So I've had some very uncomfortable discussions with members of the team around reducing the class of travel that they might fly in. And thinking about whether or not it's they need to travel business, and then some of the other things are around no red meat at our events, and that's just a culture shift. And once everyone's kind of understands that it can have an impact, there's just no pushback. It's really straightforward, simple things that everyone's really behind doing and happy to commit to.
Well, I definitely think it's clear to see when looking at your team and everything that you're doing through your work that you definitely care about the planet and the environment, but also changing other people's behaviours. So what's the one key message that you'd like to maybe spread to anyone watching for what they can do?
God, that's a magic question, isn't it? I think probably the most important thing is to not be overwhelmed. Start small and at home, and then grow out from there. But don't feel that just because you're recycling or you're switching to a reusable water bottle, they feel like small things at home. But the reality is, because there's so many of us, it'll have a massive impact. And together we can achieve it together, rather than relying on companies or governments to make big changes. I think it starts at home, and don't be overwhelmed. We can do it.
Well, I've definitely learned a lot, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ella. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye. So Amy, should we explain to people what the VIP competition that we mentioned in the intro is?
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay, here goes. One lucky Formula E fan will be invited to Envision Virgin Racing's state-of-the-art race headquarters at Silverstone. to tour the factory and garages where the Formula E engineering magic takes place. They'll also get to sit in a Formula E car and have a coach session on the racing simulator that the Envision Virgin drivers themselves train on. For anyone, this would be a visit to remember. For a Formula E fan, it's a dream come true.
Wow, what an amazing prize!
Yeah, it really is.
And to be in with a chance of winning, all you have to do is answer 3 questions that will appear in each episode, and then email your answers to be in with a chance of being in the prize draw that will take place later in the season.
All details are in the description below. So good luck, and here is the first question. Question 1. What is the top speed of a Formula E racing car? So one of the biggest climate change challenges that we face as humans is reducing our global greenhouse gas emissions and reaching those really ambitious net zero targets. But to achieve this, we obviously need governments and companies to take responsibility for their emissions and take action to reduce them. But they aren't just the only ones that are involved. We all have a part to play in this, right?
Yeah, so we decided that we'd set our family our own challenge, and that is to become carbon net zero by the end of 2021. Let's explain. Okay, let us introduce you to our Race Net Zero Challenge. So basically, over the course of this year, 2021, we're going to try and become carbon neutral as a family. Now, being carbon neutral basically means that for the amount of carbon dioxide you release into the atmosphere through things like burning fossil fuels or buying stuff or going shopping, you take the same amount of carbon from the atmosphere. So that means that this year we're going to try and drastically reduce our carbon dioxide emissions as much as possible, and then we're going to offset or sequester the remaining carbon dioxide emissions in a variety of different ways.
And that sounds really impressive, sequestering or capturing carbon from the atmosphere and locking it away so that it can't do any damage. And such a simple solution to the climate emergency.
Okay, well, maybe not. And I guess you're probably thinking that saying something like this is much easier said than done. And you're right. Because if it was this easy to balance carbon emissions, then surely we'd all be living net zero lives already, and we wouldn't have this climate emergency in the first place.
And to be honest with you, at this point in the challenge, we aren't even sure how we'll reach net zero ourselves. But I guess that is the whole point of the challenge, figuring out how easy it is and if it's even possible for a normal family like ourselves to live a net zero lifestyle.
So why are we taking on, or perhaps more accurately, setting ourselves this challenge? Well, it is, of course, so important to lobby companies, governments and world leaders to reach global net zero targets. But we all also need to do what we can to contribute to reaching these targets. We all have a part to play in reaching a net zero future, so we thought we'd better start doing what we can now and share what we learn with others along the way.
So with all this in mind, where do we start? Often finding how and where to start is one of the hardest parts, but help is at hand. Luckily, we know 2 journalism students who have an interest in the environment who are here to help us out. And we asked them this very question earlier today. Hi Helen, hi Izzy.
Hi. Okay guys, we've got a really important question for you. Now, we're trying to become carbon net zero by the end of 2021, but we kind of have no idea how to get started, so can you guys help us with that?
Sure, so the first thing you need to do is work out your current carbon footprint. So that's how much CO2 emissions you're responsible for. And then from there, you will know what you need to reduce or offset to become carbon neutral.
Well, that sounds sensible, and that's actually what the Envision Virgin Racing had to do on their journey to becoming a carbon neutral Formula E racing team. But how would we or anyone else go about working out our carbon footprint? It sounds a bit complicated and sciencey.
Okay, so don't worry, it's actually very simple. There are several carbon calculators online that you can use, but remember you're only aiming to get a rough estimate and not a very precise figure at this stage.
Okay, well, that's great, and a bit of a relief, to be honest. So if you guys could send us over what you've learned about carbon calculators so that we can use them and share that with others, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure, we'll do that.
Great, well thank you guys, and we'll hopefully catch up in a few weeks and see what we've learned.
Yeah,
Yeah, awesome. Good luck with your journey.
Good luck.
Thanks, guys. Bye. After our chat with Helen and Izzy, we tasked our dad to use their guide to try and come up with an estimate for our family carbon footprint for 2020. Wonder how we got on.
So Dad, how did you get on? And more importantly, how was our carbon footprint for 2020?
Well, do you want the good news first or the bad news?
Let's have the bad news.
Okay, so the bad news is that our carbon footprint is 7.5 tonnes of CO2 each.
Whoa. Oh gosh, that is high. Yeah. Okay, what about the good news?
Well, the good news is according to the carbon calculator sites I've looked at, we're actually below the UK average. So we should be quite pleased with that, although 7.5 tonnes is still an uncomfortable figure for me.
Yeah, definitely, especially when you compare that to the global average of carbon dioxide emissions per person, which I think is about 4.5 tonnes of CO2.
And listen to this, some countries like Mozambique, less than 0.5 of a tonne of CO2 per person.
Whoa.
And yet the UK average of over 14 tonnes per person, but listen to this, the USA 17.6 tonnes
Oh my gosh.
of CO2
Whoa.
emissions per person.
My gosh, that is
That's
high.
a lot, yeah.
Yeah, it really gives you a sense of the disparity between some countries that are emitting small amounts and some that are emitting huge amounts.
Yeah, and that actually relates to sort of climate injustice and inequality, which is, a really big problem when you look at the causes of climate change and, the impacts of climate change and who they affect the most. So I think that's something that we're going to be covering in later episodes as well.
Well, thank you, Dad, for showing us our carbon footprint, because at least now we know how much we have to offset. So thank you, great work.
So there you go, that is our Race to Net Zero challenge. If you want to try and join us in this challenge and become carbon neutral yourself, or if you just want to take a few steps to reduce your carbon footprint, we have a DIY guide to calculating your carbon footprint. There'll be details in the description below.
Question 2. What is the first step for anyone who's thinking of becoming net zero?
As the season progresses, we'll also get exclusives sent in from the Envision Virgin Racing team to give you an update on what's going on behind the scenes at each of the races. And that will be exclusive content that you won't see anywhere else, so make sure you tune in.
So the race calendar has just been published, so what are your thoughts on it?
I think we're all very excited and we're all itching to go back racing. So I think everyone in the whole paddock's excited to try and get season 7 underway. It's a good mixture of circuits, some great races as always. So yeah, I think everyone's excited.
And out of the circuits featured this season, which do you think favours the Envision Virgin Racing team and why?
Always a tricky question, but hopefully they're all going to suit us. We always go to every race with the intention of trying to compete for a win or certainly a podium. And I feel that we don't necessarily have any circuits that we favour or that we want to stay away from. So, yeah, the simple answer really is I think we're looking forward to all of them, and we'll give it our best on every race.
After testing in Valencia in December, Robin Frein said it's difficult to see outright performance on a track like this due to it not being representative of a normal Formula E circuit. So what did he mean by this, and now what does it mean for the Envision Virgin Racing team, because this track is going to be used as a race?
So I think what Robin's referring to is that the layout of the circuit that we used in testing doesn't really have any similarities with Formula E. It's very wide, the straights are very long, the corners are very fast and very open, and that's not like any of the circuits we go to, especially when we race in city centres. So what Robin's talking about is that if you've got a powertrain or a manufacturer that's developed a car that's maybe just a little bit better for those kind of conditions, then they might have a bit of an advantage at Valencia test, but not necessarily when we go racing on Santiago and Diriyah and places like that. I think because we're going back there with a different layout, which we won't find out until 2 weeks before the actual race event, we're fairly sure it's not going to be that similar to what we tested with. So hopefully it's no concerns.
So how are things now without Sam Bird, and how is Nick Cassidy settling in?
Well, obviously Sam left a pretty big void. You know, he was a well-loved and important part of the team, and we've done a superb job of finding a replacement, and Nick's settling in absolutely brilliantly. So at the moment, I really can't fault him. He's done a great job. He's really settled in. He's working incredibly hard, and we're really excited about getting him out at the races and seeing what he can do. But yeah, we're expecting big things. You know, he's a known talent, and it's been great so far.
See, I've read that you used to be great in a go-kart. So what do you like in a Formula E car? I'm assuming you've had a bit of a spin in one.
I was okay. I think I was okay. I did quite well for what I did, but it's difficult. I've not driven the real car, but I have driven the simulator quite a bit, and it's tough. It's very, very difficult, and it really does give a sense of what the drivers are going through. And certainly, I think it's good for the race engineers to do this occasionally, because it reminds you of the kind of intensity that the drivers are in, and all the things they have to remember, the complexity of just driving the car. It's very, very tough. So yeah, they definitely earn their money when they're in qualifying in the race.
Question 3. Which of these greenhouse gases has the greatest concentration in the atmosphere? And just as a reminder of how to enter the VIP competition, take a look at the details in the description below. Well, that brings us to the end of our very first Race Against Climate Change episode.
Make sure you join us next time as I look deeper into evidence of the climate emergency.
I learn all about Formula E powertrains.
And we'll look at actually taking our first steps to become carbon neutral as a family, starting with our energy supplier and some other quick wins.
See you next time.
Bye!